Hey, hi, thanks for joining me in this devlog. I'm making a third-person shooter game where you can transform and climb stuff. Since the previous devlog, I've mostly practiced my level design. I'm trying to find a good balance between verticality and open areas. Previously, I would just start sculpting terrain and placing assets without a clear idea of the level. This month I found that drawing a basic layout of the level, including the main path and the points of interest, helps a lot when building out areas. I also decided that the opening area could use a makeover, so I sat down with my tablet and drew a basic 2D concept. For this new concept I put a lot more big cliffs and rocks to try and give it more verticality than the previous version. I then created a completely new scene in Unity and turned the 2D concept 3D. It's not fully done yet, but for now I'm quite happy with how it's coming along. Next up I revisited the character movement. In the previous devlog I removed the stamina system and the sprinting. This month I got inspired by Omno to put a dash instead. A dash seems like the perfect solution because it'll make traversal more fun and it also acts as a dodge, for example to avoid drone bullets. Initially I wanted to put the same dash that Omno has, however a big difference between my game and Omno is the camera system. In Omno the camera doesn't stay directly behind the player character, so dash can always be the same move because the player is always facing towards the dash direction. In my game, the player is always facing away from the camera. This means every dash direction needs to have a unique move. I decided to use the roll animation for the forward dash, and for the dash towards the camera, the player does a backflip. Also the field of view increases slightly and I've put a quick wave effect to make the dash feel more impactful. After implementing the dash, I moved on to the main menu. I already showed the menu concept in the previous devlog, but I wasn't super happy with it yet. For the new menu, I used the scene from the story as a reference. I quite like how the new menu is looking because the hallway kinda directs your eye towards the creature at the end. I also tried out reflection probes to get the reflection effect on the floor, and I think it adds a lot to the sci-fi feel that I'm going for. Finally, I used the particle system to add some moths for realism. If you look closely you can see that the moths have a simple flying animation. To achieve this effect I put a sprite sheet in the particle system and every particle loops through a bunch of images to show the flying effect. At this point I wanted to add some more story elements. Before the game begins, I want to quickly show the part of the story that leads up to the start of the game. For this introduction, I decided to go for a simple silhouette scene. One tool I used a lot for the silhouette scene is called Timeline. It's been a Unity feature for quite some time, but I'd never really used it before. Timeline allowed me to animate multiple parts of the scene simultaneously, like characters walking towards the ship and the camera zooming in and out. It can also activate objects and trigger specific actions, so that's quite useful. Other than the short introduction scene, I also wanted to tell the story throughout the game. To do so, something that came to mind was those moments when you smell something and it immediately brings back a memory. I figured it'd be really cool to put a smell system like that in a game, where certain smells can remind the player of something that happened a long time ago. Now there's just one small issue. Smells are invisible. Somehow I need to show what the character is thinking. To tackle this I initially came up with 3 ways to show the memory to the player. I can show a small 2D video clip near the player that shows what happens in the memory. I can also make a 3D scene that overlaps with the world, kinda like the approach Carl Banks is taking with Farewell North. And finally the third option would be to combine the two and make a small diorama that pops up near the player. Eventually I decided to go with the diorama because it'll show the memory in 3D without completely taking over the gameplay. To make the diorama look a bit more interesting, I made a bubble effect. The effect consists of a shader for the diorama itself that makes it more transparent the further from the center, and it also has another shader for the bubble around the diorama. This one mainly consists of a Fresnel effect combined with some vertex offset for the animation. Anyway, after working on the story elements I made some improvements to existing mechanics. Firstly, I removed an issue that allowed players to infinitely wall jump. Basically the sphere that checks whether the player is grounded was wider than the character collider radius. This means that any wall contact would automatically set the character to grounded, which allowed players to jump whenever the character would have contact with a wall. To fix it I simply reduced the size of the sphere check so it doesn't register walls anymore. Next up I worked on the sticky bombs mechanic. After switching to the creature form you can place sticky bombs to break stuff and take down enemies. Previously I was just using a single ray to place bombs, however this makes it super difficult to hit drones and other moving enemies. This month I improved the sticky bombs mechanic by prioritizing enemies over other objects. Basically how it works is first it sends out a sphere cast that only detects enemies. A sphere cast is like a ray but much thicker, so even if you aim just next to the enemy it will still register. If the sphere cast hits an enemy it will check if there's terrain in between. If there's no terrain in between, it'll put the sticky bomb on the enemy. If there is terrain in between or the sphere cast didn't hit an enemy in the first place, it'll send out a regular ray cast for all layers. This new setup means that even if you just miss an enemy, it'll still place the bomb, making aiming a bit easier. With the improved mechanics done, I decided to work on a new feature inspired by the game Omno. One thing I really liked in Omno is the panel that shows every creature you've come across throughout the game. It really gives a sense of progression and it also gives players something to look forward to. In my game, I want to try and take it a step further by not only keeping track of the animals, but also the items, memories and weapons. To show all of this, I've added a discoveries panel that will have lists for everything you've collected. I'm not sure yet whether to show a bunch of previews from the start or to hide them until you've actually collected them. I will probably just try both and see what fits best. Since the previous devlog, I also received some feedback for the fish animation, so I've tweaked it so the fish stay underwater longer before jumping out again. Next up is another small change. Previously for the grabbing system, you would click and hold down the mouse button to hold objects and release the button to release objects. This made it a bit annoying to pull the object towards or away from the player because you weren't able to use the scroll wheel. Now I've made it so clicking once grabs an object and clicking again releases it. This way the scroll wheel is available to move grabbed objects. I've also added a step detection to the human character movement. Basically it checks for low steps and instead of getting stuck, it'll move the player over the step. To achieve the step detection, it first sends out a couple rays very close to the ground. If these rays detect an obstacle, another set of rays that are slightly higher checks to see if the obstacle is low enough to take a step. That's it for this devlog. I hope this was interesting. Thanks for watching.